Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 4 game from Rabac. So after the first 3 rounds I was on 2.5, which is a pretty good score, and I was happy with my tournament, had a plus score rating wise as well. In round 4 I faced a very strong player, a Fide Master, and my coach actually knows him. They play on the same team in the Slovenian league, maybe even in the Austrian league, I'm not sure. In any case, he's a Fide Master. I think he's about 30, 35, maybe 40. I'm not sure. So preparing for him was insanely hard because he literally plays everything with both colors. So I had no idea what he was going to do. And until morning, I had no idea what I was going to do on move 1. Round 3 was played in the morning in the afternoon on the second day of the tournament. And round 4 was played in the morning the next day. So I didn't have that much time to prepare. I spent the evening looking at his games and just trying to see whether he has any weaknesses. That's very hard to conclude for me when I'm that much weaker than him and when he's such a strong player. So I really couldn't find anything. So it basically came down to my personal preference. So I decided to play the London because I've been getting solid positions with the London. And I played d4. Now I expected many things against d4, but I didn't expect e6. And I remember he was 5 or 6 minutes late for the game. He saw d4 on the board, played e6, and then went to get some coffee. And I almost played e4 because if I can play against the French, then e4 is... I like e4. The problem is that he probably prepared something because he knows probably does know what I do against the French because I always do the same thing. So I played bishop f4. And now there are two options. Since black already played e6, bishop f5 lines are out of the question. Knight f6, c5 lines are out of the question with the early queen b3. So I think the two most challenging variations against the London cannot be played anymore. Therefore, the London has to be great here. So he could go into the main lines with d5 or play f5. He played f5. And I was really happy because I love playing against the Dutch. I only played once my London against the Dutch and I should have won. Played the 2200 player. We ended up drawing because I missed a win. Anyway, e3, knight f6, knight f3, b6. This is all very normal. Bishop to e2. As opposed to my previous opponent whom I played the London against in this setup. He played b6 first, which is much better. My previous opponent started with the sort of Leningrad and then played b6, which allowed knight g5 and bishop f3. So this actually works. Okay, he played bishop b7, and now you can castle, you can play c4. Both are fine. I played c4 first. Castles is a more common move, but c4 is okay. And now black plays either bishop to b4 check or plays bishop to e7. My opponent played bishop to d6 and I was confused. So my only experience with this pattern against the London is in the Queen's Indian setup. And I actually do play this myself with black against the London. So in this exact position, except this pawn is on f7, I play bishop d6. And that's an idea that Magnus Carlsen started playing. I think he was the first to play it. And taking the bishop is never really good because black's activity in the center is enhanced. And you basically get a sort of like hedgehog pawn structure with doubled d-pawns, which is very solid, very hard to break through. And of course control over e4 in this position with the pawn on f5. So I remember that I spent maybe 10 to 15 minutes in this position, which is definitely not enough. If you saw my game from yesterday, I spent little time on an opening position I wasn't familiar with, and I ended up messing up. So again, in those positions, if I have to invest half an hour, then so be it. I will in the future. In any case, what are my options? I can castle. That's option 1. I can take. I can retreat, or I can play knight e5. So I can not mess up my pawn structure by playing bishop g3. I can take on d6, I can castle completely ignoring him, or I can play knight e5 preventing peace trades. Now let's look at all of the options. I think bishop to g3 was the least appealing one to me. I was looking at bishop b4 check, and now something similar happened in the game, and I ended up playing knight c3, allowing knight e4, and playing rook to c1, which I thought was okay. I can also play knight to d2. I can also play king to f1. This is fine. It's not such a big deal. My king is perfectly safe on f1, because if he castles, then my rook is great. Okay, so for example, knight bd2, bishop d2, queen d2, knight e4, queen c2, castles. This is one option. I think this is passive. White should be slightly better, but this knight is great. Probably I'm going to have to trade it off after castling, but once I castle, maybe black takes and then read out the other knight via d6, knight d7, knight f6, and then knight e4. Okay, other options. The most interesting one is probably bishop takes d6, so let's look at that last. Castling is also interesting. I'd consider that. So takes, knight e4, knight c3, knight takes, b takes, castles. And now a setup with g3. You don't have to play g3 straight away, but this is the basic idea. This pawn structure is very solid, kind of similar to some Caro-Kann exchange lines where white plays the early h3, and then black plays g6, bishop f5, and white takes on f5, gf5. Of course, the structure would be this instead of with the g-pawn, but the same solidity, the same type of solidity. Okay, now the most interesting move, which I know is not correct against the Queen's Indian setup, is to simply take on d6. Now, what's the difference? Well, there's a pawn on e5, on f5, excuse me, which means that the e6 pawn is weak, which means that the king is weak. So after takes, you can just go d5. This I didn't even consider during the game. I was going to take and castle. Now, when I looked at this over the board, I was trying to find... Well, okay, you will see that I got into some trouble a few moves later because of my decision. So I thought that I had to have made a mistake here on move 7 after bishop d6. So I was looking for alternatives, and d5, when I found the idea of d5, I was just thrilled. So this is a pattern that I found on my own, which means a lot to me. It means that it will be much easier to find it during the games in the future. And when I checked with the engine, it actually confirms that this is the best way to play. Just take on d6 and then play d5. Now, why can you sacrifice a pawn? Well, let's assume black takes it. If black doesn't take it, I don't even know what the other options are. Okay, knight a6 is the best move, plus 1.3. Castles is plus 1.4. Queen e7. Yeah, okay, so taking is not one of the good options. So okay, let's say castles. You get the d4 square for your knight. Okay, and then once this exchange happens, f5 is weak. It's sort of a Sicilian pattern. Okay, in any case, let's look at what happens if takes. So if pawn takes, you just take with your c pawn. Now, if black doesn't win a pawn, then this is obviously bad, and white should be much better in this structure. Especially because this bishop has just been blocked in. So if you get to play knight c3, this bishop is never getting out. It's never getting out. Never, ever. Because there's a pattern in the Kramnik Sicilian and in other Marozzi-Bind type Sicilians where if the only hope for this bishop is for black to play a5, bishop a6, then you can play something like bishop d3 and queen to e2. And that's very common. Also, this knight is never getting out. So it has to take. So let's say bishop d5. If bishop d5, you just go knight c3. And once the bishop moves, you take on d6. If knight d5, you just go bishop to c4. Once the knight moves, take on d6. Obviously, this is a tremendous position. Okay, finally, the option that I played in the game, which I thought was the critical variation, it's actually the worst option. It's actually the only move out of the 4 options that gives black the advantage. And that's knight e5. I played knight e5. No, it's actually, it's still equal. It's equal, knight e5. But what I did next gives black an advantage. So taking is obviously not an option. Taking the knight, I mean, if you take on g2, I take on g7, and your king is less safe than mine because all of a sudden I have h5 threats, and my f-pawn is still here, so my king is safe. So the only option, sensible option, is to either check or to castle. And if you are going to castle, why not check first, misplace my pieces? So checking is the only sensible option. Now, as I said, knight d2 and king f1 are better than what I did. Knight d2 is probably the best option. But I played knight c3. Here's why. I thought g5 wasn't possible. And if you hadn't spotted g5 yet, which is likely because you're not... When you're playing a tournament game, you get invested and you see everything. So just try to figure out whether g5 is possible or not. And knight c3, if g5 is possible, is not a good continuation. Okay, so obviously knight e4 and rook c1. I can also play queen b3. One other interesting idea is to go bishop h5 here, and after g6 to go bishop f3, giving up a pawn. This I didn't consider this is an engine line, which I found after my analysis and after my second analysis. So the line goes takes, 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 king f1, takes, takes, bishop a1 and queen a8. And the engine says, despite being a pawn down, white is fine here. I don't know. I don't really want to be white here. I don't think I have compensation for the pawn. If this bishop manages to get out, then I definitely don't. So for example, put the bishop back on e7, put this pawn on a5, I just want to be black. So had I seen this, I wouldn't have gone for it. Okay, so knight e4, and I played rook c1, castles, castles. Okay, and now whether g5 is possible or not, he thought it was, I thought it wasn't, he was correct. It doesn't win material or anything, but should give him a better position, as you're going to see. So bishop takes, b takes, g5. I spent a lot of time here, not because there are alternatives to what I want to do, to what I can do. I can only play f3. But I was sort of surprised that he played g5, because I was sure that ensuing middle game is going to be better for me structure-wise. And he is obviously 300 or 400 points higher rated than me. So if he goes for this, he must have seen something I didn't. So I tried to figure out what I'd missed. Okay, so f3, the only move to save a piece. He only has knight takes c3. If he doesn't take knight, if he doesn't play knight takes c3, then I have a better position. For example, if he takes the bishop first, then here. And now white is actually just better. Black's king is absurd. So okay, f3, knight takes c3. I cannot. Well, I only have one option. I have to take the knight. Basically, I cannot play bishop g5 because he takes on e2 with check. If I could play bishop g5, that would be great, but I cannot. So tactically, I only have one move, and now gf4 and ef4 and d6. Okay, knight d3. This all was forced in my mind, and I was calculating all of this before rook c1. So in this position, I was thinking, okay, excuse me, before knight c3 actually. Okay, so knight c3, here, 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 here. Okay, and we get to this position, and I visualized it correctly, and I thought, okay, isn't white better here? In my mind, white was better here. Therefore, I thought black couldn't go for g5. He went for it, played queen f6 here, and I started thinking, so I have two options, but I played too quickly here. Okay, I actually do have two options. I can play knight f2, or I can play knight e1. Knight e1 gives me the option to defend via c2. Knight f2 gives me the option to defend my king and transfer my pieces to the king side for an attack, and still defend my pawn. My pawn is sufficiently defended. Turns out knight f2 is a mistake. The engine thinks knight e1 is a great move, equal, maybe slightly better for black, but minus 0.1. After knight f2, it's minus 1. This is actually my first mistake, my first serious mistake, which means that the game is no longer equal. Okay, he played c5, which I'd expected. I played rook d3. He played knight c6, which I'd expected. Takes, takes. Okay. And now I realized that the position is not easy. And I was playing the game very quickly, I think. Maybe, I think I had an hour and 15 minutes left at this point, so I hadn't spent much time at all. Here, I think I spent half an hour, maybe 20 minutes. But I spent a long time trying to find a plan. And I found a plan, which, luckily for me, is good. It actually works. So what can I do here? he's going to play knight d4. And here are the things that are clear. Okay, he's going to play knight d4. He will have double pressure on f3. Then he's going to go king h8, double up his rooks on the g file, try to mate me on g2. At the same time, he has queen h4. So I'm weak here, here, and here. How can I defend against that? My bishop defends sort of, but not really, because my bishop is going to be necessary in the defense of g2. So this knight is actually in the way, and I need to find a way to improve it. So there's only one way to do that. Since there are no threats for black at all, unless the knight is on d4, that means that the knight vacates the e5 square, or that it doesn't attack it anymore. So I want to get my knight into e5. So how can I do that? Firstly, I have to prevent e5. So rook e3 is a double purpose move, vacating the d3 square, giving me knight d3, knight e5, and then also preventing e5. Once I do that, my other rook needs to come to the e file as well to defend the bishop, because the knight on d3 is going to be tactically loose if the rook comes to the d file, and also giving me the option to play bishop to f1, defending g2 if black starts an attack quickly. So those are my thoughts during the 20 minutes or half an hour. So I just went for it. Okay, rook e3. It seems weird to give up the d file, but if I try to infiltrate, I don't get anything. He just plays rook d8. Either rook. Well, let's say this rook. I cannot take the bishop because I lose my queen. So there really are no easy moves. I had to come up with something. Okay, so I played rook e3. He took the d file. I played queen c1, defending f4, which is important after queen h4. He went knight d4, fine, and I went rook e1. I cannot go knight d3 straight away because, of course, I lose a piece. Okay, so rook e1, rook d7, knight d3 finally, king h8, knight e5. Okay, rook g7. And when I was analyzing this position, I just couldn't find a better plan for white, better than rook e3. And when you turn on the engine here, it thinks rook e1 is best, then it thinks king h1 is best, then rook e3 is minus 1.1. But I think the idea is, okay, now it changes its mind. But I think the idea to transfer your knight to e5 is the important part. And once you do that, you should be equal. The engine still thinks minus 0.7, but how do you materialize on that advantage? Let's see how black tried to do it. So okay, here, here, rook g7. I played bishop f1, he played rook ag8, and I just played king h1. King h1 is important because of knight f3 checks in some positions. He played queen h4, I just played rook d3, and in this position, queen h3 seems like an interesting move, but it's not an interesting move. It's not actually winning for white, which I thought it was. It actually took me some time to realize that knight f7 is not winning straight away. I just thought if he plays queen h3, he resigns on the next move. But after takes, obviously I cannot take the queen because I get mated on g1. So against queen h3, I just play knight f7, forcing one of the rooks away, now threatening to take the queen, so I take the queen. But black has knight f3, and it's not simple. I just stopped after pawn takes queen. Here I have to take the knight, bishop takes, bishop g2, takes, king g1, bishop e4, king f2, rook g2, king e3. Once you get to this position, I don't know who's better. The engine says it's equal. I just thought that it was winning. In any case, after rook d3 he played h6, so he's gonna play king h7, and also after knight f7, check, he doesn't have to take, he can play king h7. Now, I don't know what black does to improve his position. I just couldn't see what he should do. I saw what I could do. And at this point I had maybe 45 minutes on the clock, because after rook e3 I just played instantly because I saw I was going through with my plan. So I'm inviting you to find a way to improve the position for white, or find an idea to improve the position, any idea. Okay, you can pause the video if you didn't have enough time to think, which you definitely did not. Okay, so the reason, excuse me, I may sneeze. The reason I played rook d3 is the only way to go forward is to sack the exchange. Whether that's good or not, honestly I had no idea. I knew that I should probably have full compensation because this knight is better than my rooks. Same as this knight. This knight is better than any of his rooks. This knight is better than any of my rooks. The difference is he can never take my knight. Okay? So he cannot sack the exchange. I can. Another upside of that is that this bishop is just a stupid piece. And once I take, at least I get the option to play c5, which means that without doing any crazy maneuvers which would allow him to checkmate me on g2, I can get my bishop out in one move later on. So bear that in mind. After h6 I played queen d2. Queen d2 is a double purpose move. Firstly, wanting to sack the exchange. Secondly, defending the f2 square. So simply reinforcing all of the weak points in my position. One more important point, probably the most important one, if he ever moves the queen away from h4, not attacking f4 anymore, I can just play queen to f2. And then he has no threats. This pawn is safe forever. Played king h7, I played rook d1, and he actually played queen h5 here. I couldn't believe he did that. And I played queen f2 instantly. And now, I thought white was better. I didn't know by how much, but I knew one thing. There's no way for black to make progress. I just cannot see any idea for black. What's the idea? What can you do? There's no attack, obviously. There's no control over the d file because your knight is on d4. If you move the knight away from d4, I'm going to trade it off and then I'm already doubled up and it should be better. So what he did in this position is actually repeat the position. He played bishop a8, rook e1, bishop b7, rook d1, bishop a8. And now I have a choice. I can either draw, which I did in the game, because I couldn't figure everything out, or I can play the only thing that gives me any sensible continuation, and that's rook takes knight. Now let's have a look at that. So we agreed to a draw after 32, rook e1, bishop b7. But this was interesting. So excuse me. So rook takes knight, pawn takes, and I take with the rook. And my idea is to double the pressure on d2. I really may sneeze. Oh, sorry. Okay. So there's only one thing he can do. He needs to challenge me on d8. And it's not easy to do that because I already have double pressure. So he needs to start heading back as soon as possible. If my rook gets to d6 and starts putting pressure on the e6 pawn, then maybe I'm getting somewhere. So this is what I saw in my head. I saw queen e8, what I thought was the only move. I was going to play queen d2, which I thought was the only move, and then he plays queen e7, which I thought was the only move. Now, I do get to play rook d6, fine, but the pawn is already defended. And the thing is, as soon as my queen moves somewhere, he plays rook d8. And I have no easy way to make progress. So this is where I stopped. I saw this position and I saw that, okay, I shouldn't be worse. Even though I'm the exchange down, this knight is better than a rook, but I don't know. I just couldn't see a way forward. And when you turn on the engine, in the position that we drew, the engine wants to play h3, which I would never consider. But, okay, rook d2 also is just a drawing move. Rook takes d4 is fine, it's all zeros. It actually gives the advantage to white with pawn to h3, plus 0.5. It should be equal, plus 0.5, especially considering it's h3. It should still be an equal position, but interestingly enough, rook d4 is okay and it is full compensation, but it's not more than that. So again, rook takes d4, cd, rook d. My analysis was correct. Okay, bishop b7 is absurd. No, that does nothing. So it's just the engine wanting to draw the game, I guess. But yeah, there is no way to make progress after the sack, even though it's the best idea. It's the only idea. Okay, h3 is an idea, but I don't understand it. In any case, that was my game against the Fide Master, Fide Master Beletic. So I had 3 out of 4 out of the first 4 rounds. Again, good score point-wise. Bad opening again, same as in round 3. So 2 games in a row I was worse out of the opening, and that doesn't happen often. So Again, thank you to my opponent for highlighting a problem in my repertoire. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow for round 5, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.